Rookie wide receiver Darius Cooper could make the Eagles' 53-man roster with a strong performance tomorrow against the Cleveland Browns. Other players to watch in the second preseason game coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Welcome in, Eagles fans, to this Friday edition of the show. We are brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use our code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Final episode before the Eagles' second preseason game. Tomorrow, kickoff is at 1 p.m. Eastern Time against the Cleveland Browns. The Eagles had two joint practices with the Browns on Wednesday and Thursday. In my opinion, they won the practice on Wednesday, lost the practice by a pretty good margin on Thursday, but they do have a chance to bounce back on both sides of the ball again Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Today, we're going to dive into 5 players on offense, 5 players on defense to watch in this game. And this one is really crucial. It's very similar to what used to be the third preseason game, and why all eyes were on that third game is because that was the final, I think, tune-up game for the regular season, if you will, where a lot of starters still play, a lot of backups and role players can cement their role, their spot on the 53-man roster with a strong performance in that third game. Now we know the preseason only has 3 matchups, so the second one I think is very important for a lot of players, first stringers, second stringers, third stringers alike on this 53-man roster, on the 90-man roster, getting it down to eventually 53. Again, it's in just one sitting that they go from 90 to 53 now, whereas years ago, during the 4-week preseason process, there used to be multiple cut sessions. Now it's just one giant cut from 90 to 53. Wide receiver Darius Cooper, he's the player on offense that I'm watching the most on Saturday, because I think personally, with how good he's been in training camp, you can make the argument he's been, outside of, Smitty and AJ, he's been the best receiver, the most consistent receiver in training camp. Throughout July, throughout August, he led the Eagles in receiving in their preseason opener against the Cincinnati Bengals. He had 2 good joint practices against the Cleveland Browns. He has really showed off good route running, contested catch ability. He's a slippery, sudden, explosive player off the line of scrimmage. Really good body control along the sidelines. Cooper is an interesting player. And again, I don't think you should overlook him as just a guy that makes the team, or he's a practice squad level player, an undrafted guy. We know the Philadelphia Eagles have a track record of finding these kinds of guys that end up having a legitimate role on the team. Have they had that consistently at receiver? No, but look at Reed Blankenship at safety. Look at Corey Clement at running back. Look at the late draft picks like a Jordan Mailata that come out of nowhere and end up being starters or role players like Moro Ijoma. So I think Darius Cooper could be that next guy. And, we saw it in 2019, how important these kinds of players can be if you face injuries. You might need a Darius Cooper at some point this year. And I think it's been a nice surprise that he's been there. Obviously your top 3 are Brown, Smith, and Jahan Dotson, but I think Cooper has been better than Dotson so far this summer. He's been, or just as good. He's been more consistent than Johnny Wilson. He's been better than Ainias Smith. A lot of these draft picks and players that Howie Roseman has invested a lot in, Cooper is outplayed. And if he goes out there again, those draft picks will have the tiebreaker. They'll have the edge over an undrafted player. Naturally, that undrafted player is going to have to prove that they're a step ahead to make the team. Cooper has done that, though, and if he goes out there again and is their best pass catcher in the second preseason game, I feel like he's a lock to make this football team, because when you look at it, your top 4 are locked in my opinion. It's Smith, it's Brown, it's Dotson, and then it's Johnny Wilson. But after that, there's 2 spots potentially up for grabs between 3 players. It's Darius Cooper and the other 2 receivers I'm watching in this game. It's Ainias Smith and Avery Williams. I think there's 2 spots for 3 of those players. And personally, looking back at that last game, Avery Williams, the reason that I kept putting him on my 53-man roster projections is because of his return ability, but he didn't really look all that explosive in the return game, whereas Ainias Smith had a 42-yard punt return. He caught a touchdown as well. And Darius Cooper, like I said, led your team in receiving, 6 catches, over 80 yards. He's been one of your most consistent players in all of training camp. I think right now the leaders in the clubhouse to be your 5th and 6th receivers are Darius Cooper and Ainias Smith. So I'm watching those 3 specifically. Darius Cooper, Ainias Smith, and Avery Williams. I don't think Ainias Smith or Avery Williams could lock up a spot on the roster by the end of tomorrow's game at 1 p.m., but I think Darius Cooper could. Like, if he goes out there and catches another touchdown like he did against Cincinnati, goes out there and has 5+ receptions, makes some explosive plays, and just shows that he's a pretty complete player, I think eventually he's going to be switching that number from 41 to something more receiver-like, because I think he's going to make this 53-man roster. So the guys on offense that I'm watching the closest, it's that depth battle at wide receiver. Because again, after Johnny Wilson's performance last week, and he had a couple nice plays in the joint practice against the Browns in the red zone with contested catches, I think he's your 4th guy. He's a lock. He played a lot last year. He's a good pass and run blocker at wide receiver. So I think Wilson's locked in as one of your top 4. And then the Eagles normally keep 5 to 6 receivers. Do they think that these 3 players, it's worth keeping 2 of them? I personally believe that they will prefer that route, 6 instead of 5, because, you know, one of these guys is more of a natural pass catcher in case of injuries, like a Darius Cooper, and then you probably want that other guy that has that niche role of being a versatile punt, kick returner, more of a gadget player. So I think Cooper is going to have one of those spots with a strong performance tomorrow. And then Ainias Smith and Avery Williams, they have to battle it out to be that gadget number 6 receiver that also is like your Britton Covey that is a returner. And Ainias Smith, I think, has the advantage right now over Avery. He was the draft pick, had a much better game last week, had a touchdown in the receiving game, had a big punt return. I'm watching those 3 for sure. I'm also watching Brett Toth because I think Brett Toth, he is surprisingly the first man up at left guard behind Landon Dickerson. And I'm very surprised about that. I'm pretty much out on Kenyon Green at this point, but I thought Matt Pryor would be one of your first up at guard. He's been playing a lot of right tackle so far this summer, including the preseason game last week. I haven't really seen a lot of the rookies being cross-trained. You know, Pierce has been, but Miles Hinton's been playing primarily at tackle. It's been very quiet on the Cameron Williams front, so Drew Kendall's been playing primarily at center. As much as I think Kendall could translate well to guard, and I can project him there as a long-term starter, right now it doesn't look like that's in the cards for any of those rookies. So suddenly, I mean, you've got Keegan there as well, but Toth is a player that I don't love personally, but the Eagles like his versatility. He's not a good snapper, but they play him a lot at center. And since Dickerson's been down with that meniscus injury, he's been the first man up. So I would like to see him play well if he's going to be the primary backup. If he might have to start. I don't know if Dickerson's going to be ready by week 1, so I'm definitely watching Brett Toth. And then the other guy on offense is rookie quarterback Kyle McCord. DTR has been the better player so far this summer in camp, in the preseason. And as I said on the show before, I like having his mobility on the roster, but we should be rooting for Kyle McCord to pan out and to win this spot as QB3, because if you want to keep up the Tanner McKee kind of path, right? If you use Tanner McKee as trade bait eventually, like you used Kenny Pickett last year, and you know that just seems like it's the cycle of life that Howie Roseman wants out of his backup quarterbacks. If you want to continue this plan and maybe use McKee as trade bait within the next 2 years, it would be great to have that pipeline continue to be stocked with inexpensive, quality backup talent. So if you could draft McKee day 3, develops as a really cheap, high-quality backup, then you trade him for a draft pick, and then McCord comes in and is suddenly a quality backup. Like, that would be a really nice routine thing to have, you know, year after year. And he was not great in the preseason opener. He needs to be better in this preseason game to make the team, or else he could fall in that Clayton Thorson territory. Because, again, you know, DTR and McCord, they're splitting like barely any reps in practice. Most of the reps go to Hurts and McKee. So these guys got to make the most of it in the preseason. DTR was clearly the better player in that first game, and he is young in his own right and is mobile, so I like DTR, but McCord was somebody the Eagles valued coming out of Syracuse, had really impressive passing numbers, is a better, more natural passer that does have some mobility as well. Just, you know, didn't have it in that first preseason game. I would like to see him, you know, show some signs of improvement against the Cleveland Browns. Who are we watching on defense? There's a lot more battles on defense across the board on all 3 levels. We'll get into that coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we are brought to you by Monarch Money. Most people can't name all their financial accounts. I know I can't. Or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And then you don't have the full picture. You can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. I've been using Monarch to control my spending, to build my wealth, and before that, everything was all over the place for me from a financial perspective. Now it feels a lot more organized. Don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use our code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNFL. Thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We are previewing the Eagles' second preseason game tomorrow at 1 p.m. against the Cleveland Browns. 5 players that we're watching on offense. For me, quarterback Kyle McCord, left guard Brett Toth, wide receivers Darius Cooper, Ainias Smith, and then Avery Williams. Those guys are all battling for a spot on the 53-man roster. So eyes closely on those players that'll play, I think, the majority of the game on Saturday. Don't expect a lot of starters to play in this one, especially with the joint practices that happened Wednesday and Thursday against Cleveland. For the defense, I'm watching players for a different reason. On offense, it's all about those depth battles, right? Those, who's going to be wide receiver 5 through 6? Who's going to be your backup left guard? Who's going to be your third string quarterback? For me on defense, like I said it this week, I'm watching Drew Makuba more than anybody if he plays in this game. Go out there and win the safety job. Sidney Brown actually had a couple solid practices against Cleveland, so I think he's still in the lead as the starting safety, but we didn't get to see Makuba last week in the first preseason game. He's a second-round pick. That's, to me, a really exciting player. I want to go out there. I want to see him go out there on Saturday. I want to watch this game and notice him from the jump. I want to see how he covers. I want to see maybe if he gets any slot reps. I don't think they're going to move Cooper DeJean from the slot. I wouldn't, but I think it is a possibility with the up and down play of Ringo, Bennett, and Jackson. So maybe Makuba can show off some versatility. Let's see how he handles that. I want to see how a more undersized player like him tackles. Again, he's an aggressive player, very similar to Sidney Brown, but I want to see him be a more controlled tackler. I don't want to see him doing what Sidney Brown does and just diving into people's feet, because he's not going to hold up that way at his size. He's already coming off a shoulder injury this summer, so how is he as a controlled tackler? Can he play in coverage, man on man? That's something these safeties outside of him don't really have a strong ability to do. Ball skills, deep, like that's his forte. That's why you drafted him. I really am watching Drew Makuba, and I hope he goes out there and shows that he belongs as a starting safety from day one as a rookie. Of course, I'm watching the corners too. Again, there's starting battles open in the secondary. Obviously, I'm watching Keely Ringo and Adoree Jackson, but for me, I'm watching Jacorian Bennett and Mac McWilliams actually more than those two players, because I think at this point, like, we know who Adoree Jackson is. It's not going to get better. Keely Ringo, I think we know he's going to be an up-and-down player right now, and you have to either, like I said on the show yesterday, commit to that and be patient, or not, and then shift your focus to if it's Adoree or if Jacorian Bennett is somebody that you just traded for that could really be a starter from the jump. And Mac McWilliams, kind of the dark horse in this race. Like, Mac McWilliams was primarily used as the secondary slot corner behind Cooper DeJean for the majority of camp. And then this week he was playing primarily on the boundary. So if they're giving McWilliams a look, I would love to see how he pans out in this game against Cleveland. So I'm watching the corners, of course, all 5 of these guys, but and 6 actually if you want to include Eli Ricks. But I'm watching specifically, or 5 players, but I'm watching Mac McWilliams and Jacorian Bennett for sure in this game. I'm also watching Josh Uche and Azeez Ojulari. I want to see them go out there and get more consistent pressure than they did last week. It would make me feel a lot better about the edge depth right now. I think there's a lot of pressure on Jalix Hunt. Azeez Ojulari, Josh Uche, they've had solid summers in camp, but I wasn't really overly impressed in their first game against Cincinnati. So Azeez and Uche, I would love to feel a little bit better about those guys as the 3rd and 4th players in this edge rotation. So definitely watching them. And then the final guy in defense, rookie linebacker Smile Mondon. Smile Mondon played the majority of the game against Cincinnati, and he was up and down. I think there were a couple times he made some nice, run fits, a couple nice tackles in the mud, but I want him to show off the range and speed more tomorrow afternoon. I want to see that coverage ability. I want to see him go sideline to sideline and make some impressive tackles. I want to see that pursuit because Mondon's a guy that I think has a really high ceiling. And of course, Jihad Campbell's ahead of him in the depth chart. So is Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and Nakobe Dean when he's healthy, and Zach Baugh. So Mondon's looking at the probably 5th spot in this depth chart starting off. But I wouldn't guarantee that's where he ends up long term. I would love to see him, again, that range and speed. I want to see that in special teams as well because the Eagles lost a good amount of special teamers over the past couple years. So I want to see Mondon's pursuit. I want to see him make some plays in punt coverage, kick coverage. Mondon's a player that I'm watching closely, and I think Vic Fangio is excited about him. I think he wants to get a lot of tape on Mondon, and it's why he played. I mean, again, their linebacking core is pretty thin right now, but Mondon played the majority of that game. And, I think it was definitely an up and down performance as most rookies' first games are, especially day 3 rookies. But overall, I think he's a player that has a lot more upside than a, 5th round pick normally should have at inside linebacker. And again, he's more of a projection. It's a lower floor. Like, I think we know after last week, I'm like, yeah, I know who Jeremiah Trotter Jr. is. I feel very confident if he's got to start, he can be that guy from the jump. If it's not Jihad Campbell. We've seen Jihad Campbell dominate. We know who Nakobe Dean is when he comes back, and Zach Baugh. Like, those top 4 linebackers are entrenched into the depth chart this year. But Mondon, interesting player, a fun development project. That's the kind of guy that I love the Eagles drafting on day 3, and Howie Roseman says it all the time. They're gunning for long-term starters on day 3. They're gunning for like elite specific traits, high ceiling, maybe a lower floor, but Mondon's a guy that, again, that speed and coverage ability, that's something a lot of these linebackers, even for their strengths, that they really don't have as well as Mondon. So those are the guys I'm watching on the defensive side of the football. Mac McWilliams, I'm watching, of course, Jacorian Bennett, Andrew Makuba, Josh Uche, Azeez Ojulari, and then Smile Mondon. Who of all these players we're talking about, who is in do or die territory? Like, who has to have a good game tomorrow to really make this roster? We'll get into that coming up next as we wrap up this Friday edition of Locked On Eagles. Eagles fans, today's episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast, we are brought to you by Yahoo Fantasy. NFL kickoff, it's right around the corner. Eagles-Cowboys is less than a month away, which means it's fantasy football season. It's back and in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. Me and my friends have actually our 13-team 2-keeper draft on Yahoo Fantasy tomorrow. I'm headed down to Ellicottville, New York for a good draft getaway, and we're doing our draft through Yahoo Fantasy. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play Yahoo Fantasy. I highly recommend playing Guillotine. It's where the lowest scoring team, they get eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. And if you're more into the classics, you can still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league as well. Stay tuned for more killer announcements. Start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. That's yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, Eagles fans, we're wrapping up this Friday edition of the Locked On Eagles podcast, diving into tomorrow's Week 2 preseason matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cleveland Browns. A lot of players to watch. A lot of these guys, not that their careers are on the line, but for some of them, their career in Philadelphia could be on the line. A lot of these guys, too, keep in mind, even if, we just know they're not going to make the Eagles 53. These are still important games for them because they're putting on tape for the rest of the NFL, the other 31 teams. So, for instance, I don't know, who's a good, some of these running backs, Montrell Johnson, Shunderick Powell. Yeah, the odds are the Eagles are not keeping 4 running backs. A.J. Dillon and Will Shipley have had a really strong summer. Those guys, I think, are entrenched as Saquon's backups. Montrell Johnson likely not going to make the team. Shunderick Powell likely not going to make the team. But the practice squad is a big role nowadays in the NFL, and there's 31 other teams with 53 players on each roster. So you want to put on good tape whether you're making the Eagles or not. So a lot of these players are kind of in do or die situations for their spot with Philadelphia. But remember, these guys are playing for a job in the NFL, not just with the Eagles. Who is in do or die mode? For me, on offense, I'm looking at the tight ends. Again, the running backs, I think it's like a foregone conclusion. Montrell Johnson, Shunderick Powell, I doubt they're making the roster. Nick Sirianni, I mean, Doug Peterson used to keep 4 running backs, but Sirianni really hasn't since 2021. So I'm not watching the running backs for do or die mode. I'm thinking the tight ends, right? I think Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra, they're your top 2. There's a spot for one more player, in my opinion, and that's between Kylen Granson, E.J. Jenkins, and Harrison Bryant. Granson was clearly the best player of the 3 against Cincinnati. Was pretty involved in the passing game. I thought he moved well in space. So I think Granson right now is the favorite to be that guy. At first, I said it was Harrison Bryant heading into the offseason, but now I think Granson jumped them. And E.J. Jenkins was with the team the majority of last year. He caught some balls, plays on special teams. I think right now the do or die time is for E.J. Jenkins and Harrison Bryant. Right now, Kylen Granson's in the lead. Those 2 players have to show up on Saturday. On defense, I think it's obvious who's in do or die mode. It's Adoree Jackson. And I would say Eli Ricks too. I would say after the Jacorian Bennett trade, suddenly that 6th spot that felt like it was a lock to be Eli Ricks. Now Ricks is potentially on the outside looking in. He needs to have a strong showing on Saturday to get back into this mix. For Adoree Jackson, if he goes out there again and is just getting lit up like he did against Cincinnati, like he did in these joint practices against Cleveland, not a good first 2 days of action this week against the Browns for Adoree. If he goes out there and stinks again, we already know how Vic Fangio feels about Jackson. They did trade for Jacorian Bennett. They like Eli Ricks. Mac McWilliams is now getting reps at outside corner. If he goes out there and stinks, I said it on the show last week, I think this is a player that at one point felt like he was favored to win the starting job outside of Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Suddenly is a player that's on the outside looking in on the 53-man roster. Adoree Jackson has to have a good day, in my opinion, or else I could see a scenario where he doesn't make this football team. And then for me, I'm looking at Antoine Powell-Ryland, the Eagles' final draft pick of the 2025 class. Normally, Howie does keep all his draft picks, but this year is a unique circumstance because he had 8 picks on day 3. He had 10 overall selections. Even with keeping most of your picks the majority of the time, it's hard to keep 10 players from 8 players from that day 3. APR, I thought, made a couple nice pass rush moves against the Bengals, had a couple nice wins, but was slipping a lot and didn't really pop the way Patrick Johnson did. We know Patrick Johnson's versatility playing special teams as well. If Patrick Johnson goes out there and has another strong game against the Browns and APR is kind of up and down, I think he might end up being that one draft pick that doesn't make this football team. So for me, do or die time, Antoine Powell-Ryland, and I would say, who was I talking about? Adoree Jackson. Adoree Jackson at corner. I would say it's Antoine Powell-Ryland at edge. And then on offense, I'm looking at the 2 tight ends, E.J. Jenkins and Harrison Bryant, that are trying to catch Kylen Granson for that 3rd tight end spot. Tomorrow's the game, 1 p.m. Eastern time. We will have a squad show for you live on YouTube after the game. I'll have my recap show as well on all podcast platforms. So tune in. Thanks as always for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On NFL Fantasy Football Podcast. Getting ready for fantasy season. Check out the Locked On Fantasy Podcast on all platforms as well. Thanks as always for downloading, watching, and listening. And until tomorrow, let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.